It was around the time I hit my mid-30s that I started noticing the cracks in our marriage. Melissa, my wife, had always been a woman of elegance and ambition, but over the past few years, something had shifted. We had been married for 10 years, and though I had always been a workaholic, it wasn't until recently that it seemed to truly bother her. Back then, I couldn't understand why. I own a small construction company in Boston that I built from the ground up. I poured my heart and soul into the business, sometimes working 12-hour days just to make sure it succeeded. The company was doing well, and we lived comfortably in a suburban home. Still, I had a nagging feeling that my focus on work was putting a strain on our relationship. Melissa never explicitly complained about my long hours, but I could see the discontent in her eyes whenever I arrived home late for dinner or missed another social gathering. She claimed to understand, always assuring me that she was proud of the hard work I was doing to build our future. But the truth is, I began to suspect that her love for me had dwindled to something transactional. Melissa loved the lifestyle my income provided, not the man who earned it. I didn't want to believe it, though, and I continued to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. I didn't realize how wrong I was until the night I caught her. It was a Friday evening, and I had wrapped up work early, hoping to surprise her with a romantic dinner. When I arrived home, the house was silent, and Melissa wasn't in the kitchen or the living room. I checked our bedroom, and as I glanced out the window, I noticed her car wasn't in the driveway. That's when I received a text from an unknown number that would change everything. "You should know your wife is with someone else right now." At first, I dismissed it as some kind of prank, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened the Find My Phone app and saw that Melissa's location was a few miles away at a downtown hotel. My heart raced. I wanted to convince myself that she was there for some innocuous reason, maybe meeting a friend or attending a work event. But a deep pit in my stomach told me otherwise. I drove to the hotel, and with every turn, my anxiety grew. As I parked outside, I saw her emerge from the lobby, her arm wrapped around the waist of a man I didn't recognize. She was laughing, her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. I felt like the air was being sucked out of my lungs. The man pulled her close, and they kissed passionately as they walked to his car. My hands tightened around the steering wheel, but I didn't confront them. I just sat there, stunned, while they drove off. I spent that night in the office, unable to face the reality waiting for me at home. I kept replaying the scene in my head, thinking about all the late nights and business trips I took to secure our future, and how she had repaid me with betrayal. The next morning, I returned home with a mix of exhaustion and anger clouding my mind. I hadn't slept, and my thoughts were a chaotic storm of betrayal, hurt, and the need for answers. When I walked through the door, there was Melissa, sitting at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee as if nothing had happened. It took all the strength I had not to let my emotions explode right then and there. "Morning," she said, barely glancing up at me. Her nonchalance made my blood boil. I stood there for a moment, just staring at her, wondering how she could act so normal after everything I had seen the night before. Then, I decided to go for it. "Melissa," I began, my voice strained, "where were you last night?" She glanced up at me, her expression faltering for just a split second before returning to its usual calm. "Oh, I was out with some friends. You know how it is." Her lie was so smooth, so practiced. But I was done playing games. "Cut the crap, Melissa. I saw you. I saw you with him." For the first time, real emotion flashed across her face. Surprise, panic, and then something else. She sighed and set her coffee cup down, finally meeting my gaze. "Okay, fine. You caught me," she said flatly, as if I had just accused her of cheating at a board game. I was stunned by her lack of remorse. "Is that all you have to say? You're not even going to try to deny it?" "What's the point, Brad?" she replied, her tone suddenly laced with bitterness. "We both know this marriage hasn't been working for a long time. You're never home, and even when you are, you're exhausted and distant. You don't take care of yourself anymore. You've let yourself go. You used to be fit and ambitious, but now all you care about is work. When was the last time you even took me out on a date?" Her words cut deeper than I thought possible. It wasn't just that she was cheating. It was the fact that she had already given up on us long ago, and I was the last one to realize it. "So, that's your excuse? Because I work hard to give you a good life? I shot back, my voice rising. You think that justifies throwing away 10 years of marriage? She shook her head, her expression one of exasperation. It's not just about the money, Brad. I stopped loving you a long time ago. You're a ghost in your own home. You've been so obsessed with success that you forgot about me, about us. I stood there, letting her words sink in, realizing that she had no intention of apologizing or trying to salvage our relationship. In her mind, I had become nothing more than a paycheck. And while she enjoyed the luxuries I provided, she sought out excitement and affection from others. I didn't say another word. There was no point. I turned around and left the house, needing to get away from her and the memories we had built together that were now tainted by her betrayal. As I drove aimlessly through the city, a thought began to form in the back of my mind. If I wasn't good enough for her now, I would become someone she could never have again. I would make her regret the day she decided I wasn't worth loving anymore. After walking out that morning, I felt like my life had collapsed. The house that used to be my sanctuary now felt suffocating and empty, haunted by memories of a love that had died long before I realized it. I needed to escape, to find a way to channel the pain, the anger, and the overwhelming sense of loss into something productive. As I sat in my car, staring at the road in front of me, I made a promise to myself. I would become a man Melissa would never deserve again. I would build a version of myself so strong, so successful, that I wouldn't just survive her betrayal. I would thrive because of it. The first step was confronting my physical condition. Years of prioritizing work over everything else had taken a toll on my body. Late nights at the office, business lunches, and too many skipped workouts had left me overweight and out of shape. I hadn't noticed the gradual decline, but Melissa clearly had. Her cruel words echoed in my mind. You've let yourself go. The bitterness of her accusation only fueled my resolve. I signed up for a local gym the very next day and committed to a routine that was almost militant in its intensity. At first, it felt like a punishment. My muscles screamed with every push-up. My lungs burned with each lap around the track, and I could barely lift half the weights I used to. But as the weeks passed, the pain became less of a punishment and more of a cleansing process. Every drop of sweat, every sore muscle was a reminder that I was rebuilding myself from the ground up. In parallel with my physical transformation, I started working on my financial situation. Although I had a good income from my construction business, I knew I could push myself further. I expanded my company's scope, took on riskier projects, and hired a business consultant to help me identify new revenue streams. I diversified into real estate development, buying up undervalued properties and flipping them for a profit. Before long, the income one was generating had doubled, and my lifestyle improved dramatically. I went from being comfortable to being genuinely wealthy. The changes didn't stop at my body or my wallet. I also had to confront the person I had become over the last few years. I realized that Melissa's betrayal wasn't just a reflection of her lack of character. It was also a reflection of the way I had let my life stagnate. I had become complacent, more of a workhorse than a husband, more of an ATM than a partner. I had let my friendships drift away, my hobbies fade into the background. So, I reconnected with old friends, started attending social events, and picked up hobbies I had abandoned years ago. I took up boxing, something I had always wanted to try but never did because I was too busy. The rush of adrenaline, the intensity of sparring, and the satisfaction of landing a well-placed punch, all of it helped me release the anger I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. Months turned into a year, and I could see the transformation every time I looked in the mirror. The man who stared back at me was no longer the soft, worn-down figure Melissa had walked out on. He was leaner, stronger, and more confident. Even my friends and colleagues began to comment on the changes, noticing the new energy I carried with me. I had become more than just successful. I had become a force to be reckoned with. It wasn't long before I started dating again. At first, I kept things casual, not wanting to jump into anything serious. I needed to know that I could attract women for reasons beyond what I could offer financially. To my surprise, I found myself attracting attention from women who were far more engaging and genuinely interested in me than Melissa had been for years. But while I enjoyed their company, I knew deep down that I still had some unfinished business. There was a part of me that needed to see Melissa one last time, to show her the man she had underestimated, and to make it clear that she had made the biggest mistake of her life. Then, as if fate had decided to give me that opportunity, I saw her again. It happened one evening when I was attending a networking event at a high-end hotel downtown. I was chatting with a business partner near the bar when I saw her walk in. She hadn't changed much, still dressed impeccably, still wearing that same confident smile, but there was something different about her. Her face seemed more drawn, as if life hadn't been as kind to her since we last spoke. Our eyes met, and for a moment, she seemed unsure. Then recognition dawned, and a faint look of surprise crossed her face. She walked over slowly, as if unsure what to say. "Brad," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Is that really you?" I could see the curiosity in her eyes as she took in my appearance. I was dressed in a custom-tailored suit that showed off my new physique, and I carried myself with a confidence that I hadn't had in years. I felt no need to mask my emotions, no need to pretend. "Yes, Melissa," I replied coolly. "It's me." She stood there for a moment, her expression shifting between shock and something else. Regret, maybe. "You look different," she said, searching for the right words. "You've really changed." "I have," I replied, "and it's been the best 2 years of my life." She seemed taken aback by my response, and I could see her trying to decide how to respond. Her voice softened. "I've missed you, Brad. I know things didn't end well between us, but I've thought a lot about what happened about us." I could feel a mixture of emotions welling up inside me. Anger, satisfaction, even a hint of pity. "Melissa, I'm glad you've had time to reflect," I said, keeping my tone even. "But I didn't change for you. I changed for me." There was a long silence before she spoke again, this time with a hint of desperation. "We had some good years together, Brad. Maybe we could, I don't know, see if there's still something left?" I almost felt sorry for her in that moment, standing there with a look of longing in her eyes. But I wasn't the same man she had walked away from. I had built a new life, a better one, and there was no going back. "You know, Melissa," I said, "I used to think that I needed you to be happy, but I realized that I was wrong. I needed to learn how to be happy without you, and I did." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, alone and silent. I didn't need to look back to know that she was watching me leave. For the first time in years, I felt free. I had taken back my life, and there was nothing left of the man she had discarded. I was better than ever, and I didn't need her validation to know it. Walking away from Melissa at the hotel that evening felt like closing the final chapter of a long and painful story. For so long, my transformation had been fueled by a desire for vindication, to show her what she had lost. But now that I had finally confronted her and seen the regret in her eyes, I was surprised at the emptiness I felt. I had achieved everything I set out to accomplish, and yet, instead of a deep sense of triumph, there was only a dull sense of relief. The days following that encounter were strange. On the surface, everything in my life remained the same. I continued to expand my business, my workouts were still intense, and I kept seeing the same circle of friends. But there was a shift within me, as though a major part of my motivation had been extinguished now that the confrontation was behind me. I realized I had been running from more than just the pain of her betrayal. I had also been trying to escape the guilt of allowing our marriage to fall apart without fighting for it. I didn't miss Melissa as a partner. I knew that much. The love I had once felt for her had died long before I caught her in that affair. What lingered, however, was a nagging sense of regret. Regret that I had let my marriage crumble so easily. Regret that I had allowed myself to become the kind of man who would be discarded so thoughtlessly by someone who once claimed to love him. Despite my success and all the achievements I had earned over the past 2 years, I found myself questioning the purpose behind it all. When I started this journey, I told myself that I was doing it for me, to become a better man and to reclaim my life. But there was always an underlying drive for revenge, a need to make her see what she had walked away from. Now that it had happened, it felt like a hollow victory. I decided that the only way to truly move forward was to dig deeper, to find out what I was really searching for. I had become successful, wealthy, and fit, but there was still a part of me that hadn't healed. I began seeing a therapist, something I would have never considered before all of this happened. There were wounds that ran deeper than I had initially realized, and I needed to understand them if I ever hoped to find lasting peace. The therapy sessions were uncomfortable at first. I wasn't used to opening up about my emotions, especially to a stranger. But the more I talked about the last few years of my life, the more I uncovered parts of myself that I had buried. I learned that I had defined my entire identity through external achievements, my career, my body, and even my relationships. When my marriage fell apart, I lost that sense of identity, and my drive for revenge became a substitute for real healing. Over the course of several months, I came to accept that Melissa's betrayal wasn't just about infidelity. It was a symptom of a deeper problem, a relationship that had died long before either of us acknowledged it. We had both stopped trying, stopped nurturing the connection we once had. I had let my work consume me, and she had looked for comfort elsewhere. That realization didn't excuse her actions, but it did help me understand that I wasn't just a victim of her betrayal. I was also a contributor to the collapse of our marriage. Once I came to terms with that, I began to shift my focus from Melissa entirely. For the first time, I wasn't looking to prove anything to her or anyone else. I started setting new goals that were not based on some imagined reckoning with the past, but rather on building a future that I could enjoy for its own sake. I took up new hobbies, this time ones that didn't require validation or prove anything. I learned to play the guitar, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time for. I even joined a local band, not because I wanted to be great at it, but simply because I enjoyed it. Business continued to thrive, but I stopped working the ridiculous hours I had been putting in. I began delegating more responsibility to my senior management team, which allowed me to focus on my passions outside of work. I started traveling, exploring places I had only dreamed about visiting. It wasn't about running away or distracting myself anymore. It was about experiencing life in a way I had never allowed myself to do. During one of my trips, while hiking in the mountains of Colorado, I had an epiphany. I realized that the anger and drive that had fueled me were no longer sustainable. I didn't need to live my life as a reaction to someone else's actions. I needed to find my own path, one that wasn't defined by anyone else's expectations or mistakes. It was time to let go of the past, not just in words, but in my heart. When I returned home, I made some big decisions. I sold the house that Melissa and I had shared, and I bought a place closer to the city where I could start fresh. It wasn't just a change of scenery. It was a symbolic move, a way to close the door on that chapter of my life for good. Then, one day, as if life had decided to test me one last time, I got a call from Melissa. She asked if we could meet, saying she wanted to talk about everything that had happened between us. I hesitated before agreeing, not because I wanted closure, but because I was curious about what she could possibly have left to say. I told myself I had moved on, that seeing her would just be another reminder of how far I had come. But a small part of me wondered if she could still stir old wounds. When we met at a quiet cafe downtown, she looked even more worn than the last time I had seen her. The confident, lively woman I had once known seemed diminished, as if life hadn't been kind to her since we last spoke. We sat down, and she began to apologize, saying all the things I had once longed to hear. That she was sorry for the affair, that she regretted how things ended, and that she realized now that I had always been good to her. I listened in silence, feeling detached from the conversation. It was as if I was hearing an old story that no longer had any relevance to me. Her words didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought they would. Instead, I just felt pity for her. When she finished, she looked at me with a faint glimmer of hope, as if expecting some kind of absolution. "Melissa," I said, "I'm glad you were able to say all of that, but it doesn't change anything for me. I've moved on. I hope you can find peace, but you need to let go of what happened between us." I have. The look in her eyes told me she had been holding on to the hope that we could still fix things, but as my words sank in, I saw that hope fade. She nodded slowly, as if finally accepting that what we once had was gone for good. As I left the cafe, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't the sense of victory or triumph I had once imagined. It was just peace, pure and simple. I wasn't defined by what had happened anymore. I was free. Leaving the cafe that day brought a kind of closure I hadn't realized I still needed. I walked out onto the street and breathed in the crisp air, feeling lighter than I had in a long time. The encounter with Melissa had finally severed the last remaining thread that tied me to my old life. Her apology hadn't stirred up any old feelings or reopened wounds. It had simply confirmed what I had come to understand over the past 2 years. I had already let go, and now it was time to focus on the future. For a while, I continued to follow the same routine: workouts, business meetings, the occasional night out with friends. But as weeks turned into months, I felt a restlessness creeping in. I had worked tirelessly to rebuild myself after the marriage ended, achieving more success than I had ever thought possible. My business was booming, my body was in the best shape of my life, and I had more money than I could ever need. But something still felt incomplete. I came to realize that all of my efforts had been about proving something, to Melissa, to myself, to the world. I had wanted to show that I could be better, that I could rise from the ashes of a failed marriage and rebuild my life. But now that I had done that, I was left with a nagging question. What do I really want? I decided to step back and reassess my goals. The endless pursuit of financial success had brought me a certain level of satisfaction, but it wasn't enough anymore. I had spent so much time pushing myself to achieve more that I had forgotten to enjoy the fruits of my labor. I needed to find a purpose beyond climbing the next rung on the ladder. That's when I made a bold decision. I took a 6-month sabbatical from work. I appointed a new COO to oversee daily operations at the company and handed over much of the control I had clung to for so long. It wasn't easy letting go, but I knew that if I didn't step away now, I would keep chasing a goal that no longer fulfilled me. With my newfound freedom, I decided to travel again. But this time, it wasn't about running away or proving something. It was about exploring life and finding experiences that enriched my soul. I spent time hiking in the Alps, diving in the Great Barrier Reef, and exploring ancient ruins in Greece. Each place had something different to offer, and for the first time in years, I wasn't concerned with what anyone thought of me. I was living for myself. One afternoon in the small coastal town of Positano, Italy, I found myself at a little cafe overlooking the sea. The view was breathtaking, with the sun setting over the horizon, casting golden hues across the water. As I sipped on an espresso, I started a conversation with a woman at the next table who was sketching the scenery. Her name was Laura, and she was a travel writer who had been living out of a suitcase for the past 5 years. She spoke with a kind of ease and joy that I hadn't encountered in a long time. There was no pretense, no hidden agenda, just a genuine interest in experiencing life. Laura and I spent the next several days together, exploring the local beaches, trying out new restaurants, and talking late into the night. It wasn't long before I found myself drawn to her in a way I hadn't expected. She was so different from anyone I had known. Free-spirited, spontaneous, and unafraid to live life on her own terms. There was an authenticity in her that was refreshing, and for the first time since my marriage ended, I felt something stir inside me. It wasn't just attraction. It was a sense of connection, a feeling that I hadn't experienced in years. But I was hesitant. I had spent so much time building walls around myself, protecting what was left of my heart, that I wasn't sure if I was ready to let anyone in again. I had convinced myself that I was better off alone, that relationships were just distractions that led to disappointment. But Laura challenged that belief. She wasn't asking me to commit or to change my life for her. She was just inviting me to share in the present moment. It was a simple offer, but it was exactly what I needed. We continued to travel together for the next couple of months, moving from one breathtaking location to another. There was no pressure, no expectations, just two people enjoying each other's company and sharing life's experiences. The more time I spent with her, the more I realized how much I had missed this kind of connection. It wasn't about filling a void or trying to replace what I had lost. It was about creating something new, something that was entirely ours. Eventually, our travels brought us back to the United States, and Laura decided to settle in New York City for a while to work on a new book. I found myself visiting her frequently, and before long, I started to see the city as a place where I could begin the next chapter of my life. I hadn't thought about moving from Boston before, but now it felt like the right time for a change. I bought a loft in Manhattan and began splitting my time between the city and the headquarters of my company. As our relationship grew, I couldn't help but reflect on how different it was from my marriage to Melissa. With Laura, there was no facade, no need to prove anything. I could be myself, flaws and all, and she loved me for who I was, not for what I could offer her. It was a kind of love that was uncomplicated, yet profound. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking back at what could have been or what I had lost. I was looking forward. Eventually, I realized that I had found the fulfillment I had been searching for all along, not in success or revenge, but in living a life that was true to myself. I started getting involved in projects that had real meaning to me, investing in startups focused on sustainable development, mentoring young entrepreneurs, and even contributing to causes that promoted mental health awareness. The man who had once been defined by his career and his failures was gone. In his place was someone who understood that life wasn't about winning or losing. It was about finding your own path and walking it with purpose. About a year into my relationship with Laura, we found ourselves back in Italy, standing on a cliff overlooking the Mediterranean. As the waves crashed against the rocks below, I took her hand and asked her if she would continue this journey with me, not as a girlfriend, but as my partner in life. She said yes, her eyes shining with a mix of joy and surprise. There was no hesitation, no doubt, just the feeling that we had found something worth holding on to. As we embraced, I realized that the journey I had started 2 years ago had come full circle. What began as a quest for revenge and self-reconstruction had evolved into something much more, an understanding of who I was and what I wanted out of life. Melissa's betrayal had once been the worst thing that ever happened to me, but now I saw it as the catalyst that led me to where I was standing. I had built a new life, one that was not about proving anyone wrong but about being true to myself. I didn't need validation from the past or even from the future. All I needed was to live in the moment and appreciate the love I had found along the way. As Laura and I stood on that cliff, I realized that the real victory wasn't in becoming someone else. It was in rediscovering who I truly was. Standing on the cliffside with Laura that day, I knew I was entering a new phase of my life, one where the past would no longer define me. It was a strange feeling, this sense of contentment and peace that had replaced the bitterness and drive for revenge. I was no longer a man chasing redemption or validation. I had found my own path, and for the first time in years, I was at ease with who I was. Life with Laura was different from anything I had known before. Our relationship wasn't built on convenience or appearances. It was rooted in a deep and genuine connection. We challenged each other, supported each other, and most importantly, we were honest with each other. There were no masks, no pretenses, just the freedom to be ourselves. As we began planning our life together, I realized that the lessons I had learned over the past few years had prepared me for this moment in ways I hadn't anticipated. Returning to New York after our engagement in Italy, I decided to make some long-term changes to my life. I knew that I didn't want to fall back into the same patterns that had led me to neglect what was important. The company I had worked so hard to build was thriving under the leadership of my new COO, and while I was still actively involved, I no longer felt the need to work endless hours to feel accomplished. I shifted my focus to projects that genuinely inspired me, philanthropic endeavors, environmental initiatives, and mentoring young entrepreneurs who reminded me of my younger self. Lara's career as a travel writer took her all over the world, and sometimes I would join her, combining my business trips with her assignments. We spent months exploring places I'd never thought to visit before. Remote islands in the Pacific, the bustling markets of Morocco, the ancient temples of Japan. We shared countless adventures, from climbing mountains to diving in deep waters, each experience bringing us closer together. It wasn't about escaping or trying to find ourselves anymore. It was simply about living fully and sharing our journey. However, I wasn't naive enough to think that everything would be perfect forever. Life had a way of throwing challenges our way, and as our relationship deepened, I found myself confronted by an old fear, the fear of losing what I had worked so hard to build. It wasn't just about material success or the new life I had created. It was about the love and peace I had found with Laura. A small part of me couldn't help but wonder if I was deserving of it all, given the mistakes I had made in the past. One evening, While we were having dinner at our Manhattan loft, I opened up to Laura about my lingering doubts. "You know," I said, setting down my wine glass, "sometimes I still feel like I don't deserve this. Like I'm waiting for something to go wrong because I've been so used to things falling apart." Laura reached across the table, taking my hand in hers. "Brad, you don't need to punish yourself for the past," she said gently. "You've worked hard to get here, and you've grown in ways that most people never do. Life isn't about being perfect or having everything figured out. It's about moving forward and learning from the journey." Her words resonated with me, cutting through the self-doubt that I had carried for so long. She was right. I wasn't the same man I was when my marriage with Melissa fell apart. I had faced my shortcomings, confronted my fears, and emerged stronger on the other side. The past didn't need to haunt me anymore. In the following months, Laura and I decided to start a new project together, a charity organization aimed at providing educational opportunities for underprivileged youth. It was something that had always been close to my heart, and with Lara's background in writing and communication, we were able to bring the initiative to life. We established scholarships, built partnerships with schools, and even set up mentorship programs where I shared my experiences in business with young students. Working on the charity was more than just fulfilling. It gave my life a new purpose that extended far beyond personal success. I found myself investing time in others, seeing the impact of our efforts on young people who might not have otherwise had a chance. It wasn't just about giving back. It was about creating something meaningful together, building a legacy that was driven by love and compassion, not just ambition. As we continued to build our life together, the wounds from my past healed in ways I hadn't expected. I came to see that my marriage to Melissa, painful as it was, had ultimately been a lesson. It had forced me to face the parts of myself that needed change and had pushed me to grow beyond the man I used to be. There were moments when I would think about her, not with anger or resentment, but with a kind of understanding. We had both been flawed, both searching for something we couldn't give each other. In the end, I had found that something in myself, and then in Laura. The years passed, and soon enough, Laura and I welcomed our first child, a daughter named Isabella. Holding her in my arms for the first time, I felt a surge of emotion that I couldn't describe. It was as if all the pain, all the struggles, and all the victories had led up to this one moment. I had been given a second chance, not just at love, but at life itself. As a father, I vowed never to let work consume me the way it once had. I wanted to be present for my daughter, to share in every milestone, and to be there for every scraped knee and bedtime story. I didn't want to look back years later and realize I had missed out on the most important parts of her life. Laura and I continued to travel, though with a bit more planning and a little one in tow. We brought Isabella along on some of our adventures, eager to show her the world and the beauty it held. As she grew, so did our love for each other, deepening with each passing year. We weren't a perfect family, but we were a happy one. Something I hadn't believed was possible when I had walked away from Melissa all those years ago. Looking back now, I realized that the journey I took after my marriage ended wasn't just about changing my body or becoming more successful. It was about rediscovering who I was, finding out what truly mattered, and having the courage to let go of the past. I didn't need to prove myself to anyone anymore, not even to myself. All I needed was to embrace the life I had built and the love I had found. And so, as the sun set over the cliffs of the Amalfi Coast, where it had all begun with Laura, I held her close and watched our daughter play by the shore. For the first time, I understood what true peace felt like. It wasn't about forgetting where I had come from, nor was it about the success I had achieved. It was about finding joy in the present and knowing that I had the strength to move forward, no matter what came next. Subscribe to the channel and like this story if you liked it. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next stories. Click on the playlist on the right to listen to previous stories. See you soon.